So why don't we delve straight into our fascinating session, the startup nation in a setting of uncertainty. We know, again, this race for the reform, legal reform, has created a new reality. And our opening session will be discussing just that, the startup nation during these times, and how do we cope with that? I'm so happy to welcome all the panelists, Saul Singer, who is the co-author of the bestseller Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle. Please, you are welcome. You'll be the first to come up. And right after him, you can choose any seat to sit upon. And Eyal Waldman, who's the chairman of Waldo Holdings, former president and CEO of Mellanox. Please, sir. And Eldad Shachar, Erez Shachar, managing partner of Qumra Capital. Yeah, you know what? I mean, they always write down the names for me, and then I make up new names. So, yes, Erez Shachar, please, managing partner, Qumra Capital. And Eldad Tamir, who's the CEO of Fishman Investment House. And this will be moderated by Sami, Peretz, who's a senior writer and commentator, former chief editor of TheMarker.
Connect to this? Did you connect to this one?
בוקר טוב לכולם. אני רוצה להתחיל.
I would like to begin. Of course, there is some sort of a reform or legal overhaul. But what can I say? Just to be fair, let me say that the high-tech crisis started way before, or rather a year before. But just let's start off with some round. I want to ask everybody, where do you see that point in time where what happens in Israeli high-tech starts sort of diverging from what's happening in world high-tech? Eldad, I think Israeli high-tech is much more dramatic in the impact that it has on the local economy than the high-tech around the world. Meaning, you can take out sort of the high-tech almost anywhere and the economy will still function. But in Israel, high-tech is very significant. So any crisis in high-tech, before the crisis that we will be talking about in a moment of, again, this terrible catastrophe that we call the reform, the overhaul, before the high-tech around the world is undermined, we feel it more significantly. Okay, give me an example. What do you see it in the graphs in the stock exchange? I mean, at which point in time do you see something is starting to diverge or detach? So yes, this detachment of the stock exchanges is because of this overhaul. We see huge gaps between what happened in the stock exchanges around the world and Israeli stock exchange. Now people say, oh, stock exchange, such nonsense. At the end of the day, the stock exchange and the shares actually represents what Israeli investors, all investors think of Israeli economy. Its hopes, its expectations. The minute you see these discrepancies, you can see that, again, the difficult situation, also the dollar-shekel exchange rate, you could see how it's gone up. And since this nonsense called the overhaul is also signifies lack of trust. So, where do you see this divergence or disconnection as somebody who invests? Do you see a point in time where we have somehow detached ourselves? I think it was, again, when the new government was formed, when people started understanding what is about to happen and what to expect. When it was some sort of a messianic government, people started expressing themselves in a less logical way, less economical way, but talking about national ideals or messianic sort of ideologies. And you saw that it was pulling towards corruption and looting sort of the national petty cash. Okay, you're talking about the public money. Where there is corruption, you see businesses collapsing. You'll see this in Brazil, Venezuela, in many places. The minute, again, even the Palestinian Authority, where there is corruption, business people don't want to invest it. They have no idea where the money is going to go, what will happen to the money, and who will decide if it will be successful or not. This is what is happening right now. So the minute this government was formed, and people started hearing Smotrich and Ben-Gvir later on, then Derry, and again, appointing a minister who was indicted a few times, that he was appointed as a minister. So somehow, again, people have been attacked, like the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, the Chief of Police. So you see, instead of the state going in the right direction with good governance, we're suddenly deviating. And that is very scary because investors want clarity. party. They don't want the carpet to shift beneath their feet. They want to feel that there is a strong legal system, that if they come across legal problems, there'll be a good, strong court. So, I mean, you can go invest in England, in Japan, in China, and other places, and they say, oh, Israel, the place of lack of clarity. I don't want to place my money there. I'd rather go someplace else. Why don't we wait and see? And, you know, even after it changes, it doesn't happen in a day that suddenly people will start investing here right away. I mean, we've put them sort of in the penalty box. They see a state that is less stable, and later on you'll see that people will still wait until we'll be able to prove that the state is on track again. They'll feel comfortable that there is a strong and stable Supreme Court that's not threatened in any way. That they'll feel that there is less corruption than there is today, so they'll feel comfortable investing here. Till that time, we'll see the international money not entering Israel. Now, this is a huge problem, not only for the high-tech world. We have to solve this problem as quickly as possible. Erez, let me make it a bit difficult. You know, the minute that legal reform, or call it overhaul, the minute it was published, the high-tech people, you know, went to the street and they started calling out. But the motivation of this legal reform comes from different places, not to do away with the high-tech industry, but to promote interests that have to do with the components of the government, ultra-Orthodox, settlers. Why are you the first to sort of jump up and call out? Because, you know, this is just, the high-tech is just the collateral damage of the overhaul. It's not the objective. Not only that it's not the objective, but I imagine, I mean, we know it's not the objective, and we all understand the importance of the high-tech, but maybe you'll get benefits, maybe even tax benefits, so that you just be quiet and let us, you know, make this overhaul. You know, we've never demanded anything of the state as an industry. We base ourselves on ourselves. We take money from the outside internationally, and then we invest them in local companies. This is what we've done in the past 2 decades. And beyond support in 1992, with that initiative that kind of started off or gave that first spark of Israeli high-tech, our industry really didn't demand anything, and we won't demand going forward. We just want that infrastructure upon which we can build a very prosperous high-tech. That's, you know, modern liberalism. You know, that's all we want, and we'll do the rest. That was our message from day one. That is why this overhaul is, or at least this attempt to overhaul the legal system, I think was a huge shock, because the minute we started hearing about what it tends to do, because we, again, people from venture capital, I mean, people pay us for us to look forward into the future. The minute we invest, we have to think, what will the market look like, if, you know, years from now? We have to identify entrepreneurs to see, do they have the ability to execute with the plans that they bring? We looked forward, and we were able to do that pretty quickly. The minute we started hearing that music from Yariv Levin and his friends, on the 15th of December, which is 2 weeks before the government was formed, again, we already wrote that letter, the high-tech letter to Netanyahu, which was basically a letter that initiated this circle of high-tech people that was, again, fighting for its state. First time in history, by the way. We were always very individualistic. We worked very hard. We didn't have time to deal with the state. We weren't that interested in that. You know, I want to sort of, maybe I should, you know, bless the fact that, again, this overall, you know what? It's an optimistic thing. It's this arousal of a liberal community, huge liberal community, a very strong one with very strong values. We actually sort of discovered one another, right? Men and women in this process, and a huge community was formed with a very, you know, strong political power. I think that is what created this, you know, the attempt for this legal overhaul. I think it will also help us achieve rectified state. You know, on the one hand, it's great it's happening. On the other hand, you see the resources, Erez resources and others who have invested, you know, maybe lots of, again, percentages in this. It's a huge damage. You know, the CEO, instead of focusing on their businesses and flying around the world, instead of that, they have to organize protests and things like that. I mean, that's a problem, right? So don't get confused here. Just a bit of statistic, you know, when we detach ourselves, when did we disconnect ourselves from the world market? We were always in full, you know, we're completely on par again with the high-tech world in America, Silicon Valley, and all the rest of it. And until Q4 of last year, we had again a decrease from 2021. There was a peak year, then there was a decrease, a significant decrease in 2022. But Q1 of 2023, again, this is what can we do? Not by chance, where all the chaos started here. There was this huge disconnect from the American market, and they started recovering in that first quarter in America because of a huge revolution that's happening in the high-tech world, the AI, the LLM, the large language models, LLM, ChatGPT, and all of those. In the US, there was a huge, a flourishing of investments in startup companies. And in Israel, we saw a huge decline from the previous Q4. So Q1 2023, we actually dropped by 25% in investments in Israeli high-tech. And in America, again, it was significant compared to last year, but it was only 44%. We'll get back to that in a minute. Let me just complete the rounds and turn to Saul Singer. You wrote that famous book, Startup Nation. If you were to write, again, an updated version of this book, how would you describe the involvement of those high-tech people in this issue, a political issue, legal issue, constitutional issue? You wouldn't expect to see them there, right? Would you give them points for that? Is it points in their favor? Absolutely. I agree with Erez. I think, as difficult as it was and scary as it was, I think it's a gift at the end of the day, because we're sort of like a frog in deep waters. And the problem with the ultra-Orthodox and, the social problem, I don't want to say that the ultra-Orthodox are a problem. Our social problem, again, would have probably gotten worse with the demographic problem, and we wouldn't have done anything. They just say the ultra-Orthodox are a potential, not a problem. We just have to make this potential realize itself. That's, let me rephrase. I don't know who said this. You're right. That the biggest aliyah, the biggest wave of immigration is from Haredi, from the ultra-Orthodox sector. And I think that in terms of vision and in terms of strategy, I think we have to look at this entire overhaul as a deeper social problem and what is behind it. So when we think about it, now why did we all go out into the streets? I think it's because some sort of a fear of the future. We know what's happening demographically. And on the other hand, people went out because of frustration from all those years of feeling that they weren't, given what they deserve, that they were deprived. So the thing is, what do? I think we created this problem, meaning we made this connection between, being recruited to the army and being able to work. It's our problem. We invented this. We invented this problem. And there was never such a thing. In Jewish history, there was never such a thing. And there's also no such thing in the world that an entire community, the ideology is not to work. Not good for them. It's not good for us. So I think that we somehow have to sort of cut or sever this connection between army service and work. Now people say, everybody has to have, equal share in the burden. But right now, there's a least equality in this share in the burden, in the military burden, that is. When I talk to ultra-Orthodox people and I say, what happens if we drop the age, not from 26, but not even 23, but to 0? What happens? What will happen? They'll say, so many more people will actually go out to work, and many more will even go to the army as volunteers. And I also think that they will have to do some sort of a national service. They'll have to commit to that. And that is some sort of equality. That is an equal share in the burden. I think it will be a huge step forward to try and rectify this distortion that really undermines everybody, creates damage to everything. I think this crisis has given us the opportunity to rethink what has to be done, and maybe we can do something about it. You know, you talked about, you know, we talked about the term lack of clarity. You know, I mean, you're in the business of non-clarity, right? This entire state is in a state of no clarity. But the state of Israel is a unique example of an event that at least you know on which day this lack of clarity began, who, again, was the bearer of this news, this gospel, and maybe we can, you know, shift things back and put it back in the box. But you have to admit that lack of clarity in your industry started way before. I remember, in June 2022, you said you're going to freeze your investments because the valuation or again, it's all just exaggerated, and you stopped the investment. So we got to this event of the legal overhaul where, with a global backdrop of high-tech, weren't that great. So the question that I want to ask, maybe after a few months have elapsed and there is this legal overhaul that's happening, maybe it has created opportunities in your field. You know, there are two parallel axes. One is of the industry, technological industry, and you saw it's always cyclical. You saw in COVID, and it fluctuates. It goes up and down like a wheel. People can use more technology during COVID. It brought things up. Now you see a drop once again, and then you see NVIDIA, new companies, Mellanox, that are really successful at the moment. But again, you see everything is very cyclical. Now this is a one axis that again runs through the entire world. So it's good for you, right? What do you mean it's good for you? You invest in companies, their value goes down, and then you invest. You might maybe invested when the value was higher, and then it drops. So you know, write this down, people. Okay, if you invest on time during COVID or whatever, and things have dropped, then it's not that great for some people. Depends when they invested. But you see that the private companies actually, you know, monitor the private economy. I mean, with some sort of delay, and maybe they have to sort of recognize the fact that their value is much has dropped. It takes some time. So when you see that the public, again, market has gone down, maybe you have to wait until you invest in the private sector, and then you can invest once again. But Erez, don't you see that there are more investment opportunities now when all sort of the air has been deflated from the industry? I think that, again, I'm waiting. We're waiting a little to see where the wind turns. But I want to talk about, you know, what kind of unclarity do we want? Because, of course, we live in this uncertain climate or environment. I mean, we venture capital, right? We're looking for risk. If you don't risk, if you don't, you know, take risks, you're not going to make money. We keep investing in future things, and the risk is high. But the risk that people pay us to take, it's a technological one. It's a risk that has to do with execution, with the market. We know how to assess it. We know how to evaluate it. It's part of our world. So if you do your work well, you know how to assess risk pretty well in these worlds. But there are other risks that are beyond the game that we don't want to take, we cannot take, and we cannot build a prosperous industry of venture capital. Again, risk about freedom, about the administration, the government, equality, and about, you know, basic values. Without these, we cannot have the high-tech world. There's no innovation without these values. If you don't have a proper intellectual world, you can't build on that. That is a risk we cannot take. So what? Delaying the legislation of the overhaul, did that do anything? Did it give some sort of a signal to the investors? No. You know, we put them all in the penalty box, as was said. So long as things are delayed, they are on hold, investors from around the world will not come and invest in Israel. We'll start seeing investments again when we are able to go out of that, you know, pause mode, and then when people start feeling that there is some sort of stability and they feel secure. How do we create that? You know, legal experts are sitting trying to find solutions, and there are solutions, but you have to, again, boost confidence that, again, this legal reform is not on the table at the moment. But if I look at the government policy at the moment, it's like sort of on hold, right, to sort of calm things down. But politically, I don't see where, you know, the Prime Minister will come and say, okay, I got the idea, I'm letting it go. Maybe it will die away naturally, but it's bad for the industry if they don't actually say this, proclaim it officially, we're finished with this reform, we don't want it. You know, there's that sign where I've seen there's no democracy. If there's no democracy, there's no high tech. I saw a poster like that. I mean, that says it well. But high tech, let's put it on the table. High tech will always be the strongest industry here. If there's no high tech, there's no economy here in Israel. We don't have fuel, oil, like in many dictatorships. And by definition, we're not like China. Here in Israeli economy, high tech is again a sign. Again, I mean, if we have no control, I mean, high tech can always move to a different country. I mean, it's the strong part, it's the strong link of the chain. But all around, all those the weaker people, those who consume, people in different services. I mean, the social gaps here in Israel are crazy. They will be harmed. They will. The high tech again will be able to protect itself, but it's not the weak link here. You don't have to feel sorry for high tech. The high tech actually symbolizes the need to protect all of us from something that will sort of break down everything. That's the real essence of this discussion. But you know what? Maybe you're only noticing this legal overhaul. Maybe the focal points have to be, again, looting, that the public monies, corruption that's happening here. I think that is no less bad than the legal overhaul. Because if you look at all the people, taking that public money that belongs to us, and again, channeling them to their own sectors, whether it's municipal fees or the food coupons or transportation. People invest, so much more for each settler in the West Bank. I mean, you're only focusing on the legal overhaul. Talk about looting the public monies and with no shame. And again, attacking all those defense systems that we have for democracy. Why don't we focus on these problems? I mean, these will, again, distance investors as well. Maybe that's, again, the price of a very capitalistic industry, and maybe this was led by high-tech, creates this legendary wealth that we have never seen before. And people look, many people look at themselves that are not take this track, did not maybe gain the right education, and they say to themselves, Waldman knows how to make money from high-tech. I know how to make money from the public service. We'll find our own track. Again, trying in this, just simply trying to survive. Everybody can enter the world of high tech. No barriers, but there are barriers. You need skills. Okay, you need skills. I mean, if you're not smart, you can't be in high tech. If you're smart, you can go into high tech. It doesn't mean that you have the right to go and loot the public money. And we have, again, Christians and Druses and Arabs. And we see it's not that if you come from a certain family, you're better or not. I mean, it's open to anybody, and there is complete equality in this industry. I think that the high-tech world also provides a livelihood for many people, and all the circles that are all around in real estate or in transportation or services and cleaning services and entertainment services. I mean, we do provide a livelihood to many circles. I don't think you have the right to say that, if I'm not skilled enough for high-tech, I can go and loot public money. How can you say that? If people say that, they'll stop investing in such places. But you have to say, at the moment, it's not done again, not looting. It's done through democratic means. Yes, but to take that money, deviate the money from where it's produced, and to deviate it to places that exploit and are not productive, I mean, that's not good economic logic for a state. Unless we want to follow, Poland, Venezuela, Hungary, and, maybe there's some sort of a fault here, because I think that the money is channeled, let's say, to the ultra-Orthodox, for example, is not the problem, but the negative incentives that are created. I mean, all of you, I'm sure, all say, let's give 20, 30 billion shekels to this community, to the Orthodox community. So let's just, as long as we give it skills so that they can contribute to society. But I think, the plans of giving money to the Arab sector, again, that was outlined a few years ago, multi-annual plan of 15 billion, again, shekels that go through different milestones and move forward, and financing real and true programs that are supposed to create employment in the Arab sector. That is smart. government policy, but money that is just sort of channeled to different sectors without creating incentives to go out to work or to study core studies and things that actually do create growth at the end of the day and social mobility. I mean, monies that are channeled out like that, that's crazy. I want us to relate to this because you mentioned it before, that economically speaking, I think we can all agree that we need incentives to get people to work, but we have somehow failed in this regard. The thing is, why? Maybe we were too busy, maybe, putting my hand to this group, but maybe we weren't involved enough in these processes. Now that there is this connection between IDF service and employment, it's a problem. I think it's more than an incentive, right? I think, again, we're not giving the possibility to many people to go and work, to go into the labor force. So I don't think they have to be given incentives not to work. But first of all, I think we have to remove this barrier that obligates them. And I think there are other important things that are happening in the ultra-Orthodox world, because people think that it's okay that they're so poor, but no longer. They actually do want to move forward. They want to buy nice cars. They don't want to be poor. They don't want to always use public transportation. And I also think that, again, if you look at the entire society, ultra-Orthodox society, the head of yeshivas, the rabbis, they somehow want the situation to stay. I'm talking about the leaders. But the actual people, any ultra-Orthodox person on the street, you think he doesn't want to work? No, not at all. It's not a natural state. But there's also the problem of skills, of course, because they don't know English and they haven't learned, basic studies. So again, but there's more and more need or the desire to go out and work. I think we've seen that. So also the parents, the children, they do want to learn things. They want to be able to work. And it's not going to happen the minute we say you have to teach it, because if they're not going to learn that way if you just compel them, right? I mean, it has to be done differently. GPT are actually very important because anybody can have that personal tutor, the best personal tutor, even if they don't have, again, access to the internet or to the smartphone. Last year I heard the Sales Monitor Minister of Finance, ChatGPT, AI, because people said to him, oh, you're giving incentives to non-work. But he said, but the labor force is going to change and all sorts of positions just won't exist anymore, all kinds of jobs. So we have to think about the next stage.
The most important thing that there is some sort of a motive from within the community, young children, young people who want to learn, who want to acquire the English language, and if they want to, they will do it. But how can you skip over this? We're not going to resolve all the issues of the ultra-Orthodox community. There are rabbis, there are politicians who aim at certain places. Why is the success story that you're selling of exits and successes and self-realization and all that does not penetrate the hearts of those young people there? It's not that it doesn't penetrate. If we had to do a film on Netflix, it's a cult. It's a sect. It's not easy to come out of this. A child that is born to an ultra-Orthodox family in Jerusalem or Bnei Brak, his social mobility is very, very minimal. We're paying this sect to exist. And as you know, they have leaders, and the leaders serve themselves. So, to be fair, this is not a problem of neither the Likud nor the right nor the left. It's a mistake made by Ben-Gurion, and it continues on and on. But and that's a part of what emerges from this, social turmoil. I believe that our responsibility is more directed toward the ultra-Orthodox. Why are we financing a sect, a cult? And we have to stop doing it. And it should be based on a dialogue. It's unfair for us to finance this sect that eternalizes ignorance and poverty among children. And the only way is a real, genuine leadership that would say enough is enough. These leaders are merely leaders of a sect, and that's reality, and we should look it in the eye. I think that we are making this discussion a bit too shallow concerning the ultra-Orthodox. I, at least in the last few months, happened to meet many people that I've never met before in my life, resulting from my extensive political, social activity. And many of them were ultra-Orthodox. And I identify today deep undercurrents in the ultra-Orthodox community that are very different to their leadership. First of all, that they're a lot more open to the outside world. Kikar Shabbat, Chadrei Charedim, all those places on these are television shows from which they get their information, so there's a lot more openness to our world. And the young people truly want to go to work. They truly want to emerge from this poverty circle. And I believe that there are real victims today of very, very corrupt leadership that is striking political deals with an even greater, more crazy leadership, and actually they're using or giving out budgets that would actually destroy the future of those young children. Unlike Eyal, I think that the budget is very important. We should actually rise against it wherever we can, but there is a gap between this attempt to do the coup and the plundering of the coffers. This is a political stinking trick. The current budget is truly crazy in any measure, but it's reversible. Turning from a democracy to autocracy is nearly irreversible, and if it is to be reversed, it will take the toll of much blood. We have to take the smoking gun from the table, win the next elections, and create a normal government, and then change the order when it comes to the bringing in of ultra-Orthodox to the labor market or the high-tech sector. It cannot happen while this government is in power. You wanted to reach out to different populations, right? It's so hard to do this when you're still struggling against a government policy. Eyal and myself and all our friends are doing it. We have investments in the ultra-Orthodox community. We're trying to bring ultra-Orthodox and Arab populations into high-tech, but there's a difference between an industry that is trying to forcefully include and a government that creates a policy of separation, exclusion, and does exactly the opposite. Now, Eyal, assuming there's a yeshiva student, a Haredi, that is about to get more 1,000 shekels in his allowance, and you have to contend with the government on the question, how do you create a track that would be tempting enough not to stay there, or maybe for just a short while, and to find his place in your economy? Can you offer him anything? Are you at all an interlocutor in this? First of all, I'd like to refer to you all to this guy who wrote for Ben Caspic, and I met this guy, and he's forced to stay in the ultra-Orthodox community. He's afraid to leave it for personal reasons. And there are thousands of them who remain in the ultra-Orthodox as forced religious ultra-Orthodox people. Our problem is education. As soon as they don't speak English and they don't have mathematics knowledge and they don't know how to integrate, it's a problem. So together with Google and others, we prepared a program for the training of the ultra-Orthodox people, and by that bring them into our core. So those not teaching the core studies would not get not even a dime for anything. The rabbis object to this because that means that they would lose control over these people. And we must make sure that a child from the age of, from 4th grade would study English and mathematics. So that means that what? This social protest, those demonstrations on Kaplan Street should focus their messages on that. I agree with the Erez. We have to replace the government, and we have to make sure that the policy would advance us to the 22nd century in a way of a democratic, liberal state. We don't need to say that we force anything on the ultra-Orthodox. We have to give them the understanding, and we're working on this in a number of frameworks, not only with them, but with the Arabs and Palestinians too. And we have to stop talking about those polarities. We have to talk about something that is very much in common to all of us. We met with Arabs and ultra-Orthodox, and we had rabbis on dinner, and you saw great love between those rabbi leaders and the high-tech leaders. So this love that exists between them was amazing, and I think that this would allow us to converge toward a common goal. What was the goal of that meeting? Our goal, simply, cook dinner. You cook dinner, right? So we had to come. You cooked this. Well, I didn't cook, but actually there was a person who was a kosher supervisor, and he came before we lit the fire, and they indeed wanted to make sure that all the procedures were taken as they should be. So we're doing things between Muslims and Jews, and I think that our work. But you're saying something very frustrating. You're saying I'm meeting with them, I talk with them, there's love, but as long as this is the government, nothing will happen. I believe that progress is bound to be made. People in the private sector will bring more things, and there's going to be positive friction, and we will reach agreements concerning a social covenant that would lead us to so many things. As people said, that there's an interest on the part of the ultra-Orthodox world to leave their poverty circle and to try to influence and enjoy this whole ride. Evolution will not change. This attempt of the leaders of the sect to leave those members of its sect in the previous century, it would fail. It would not succeed. It's a sect. You have to understand, we're dealing with a sect that has leaders, and it doesn't represent the entire public. But we're not talking about a level of interest rate. Until a year ago, there was a zero interest rate. You mobilized, you raised money with no problem, and that too is one of the major forces in the industry that block its progress. Why aren't we talking about that? Nobody denies the fact that there's a global crisis in the high-tech industry. It significantly impacts the fundraising processes and the growth of the industry. However, and again, we can compare ourselves to the world, and the comparison is very clean. We have always been correlated with the world, and today we've left that correlation. We no longer have this connection to silicon level. You said earlier that we're missing this train. Can you talk about that? There is a revolution today in an order of magnitude that never happened in the previous decades. It's this technological revolution. The AI revolution is one that Israel has capabilities that are second to none because of the military, because of technologies that were developed in the last few decades in the private sector. And there are AI capabilities, machine learning, deep learning, that are truly a concentration of talent that is really unparalleled in the world. And today, instead of concentrating all our efforts in turning Israel into an AI nation in an era that it flourishes and is bound to flourish decades ahead, we are busy protecting ourselves against a government that attacks us. What does it mean? Entrepreneurs, instead of sitting down and developing things, are simply in Kaplan? Yeah, I mean, on the streets demonstrating, first of all, yes, but that's not the most important thing. Whoever wants to establish any venture in AI will run to Silicon Valley to get the money because of the lack of flow and lack of investments in the Israeli economy. Entrepreneurs would establish their company in Delaware. Most of them will be located in the U.S. Perhaps they'll have an R&D center, a small R&D center, and will be just an outsourcing venue for companies in the U.S. And that's exactly the case that was here 30 years ago. The Americans who entered investments in the Israeli economy did not trust Israel enough, and they said, no problem, we want to establish a company. We understand that you have talent. Have your company registered in Delaware, and we'll do something here. In the last decade, we made a concentrated effort to leave companies in Israel based on purely Zionistic reasons, because it doesn't have any meaning if the company is registered in Israel or in Delaware, but it does mean a lot for Israel. Taxes ultimately on the day of exit, or whenever it continues to thrive and flourish and pay taxes, ultimately go to the Israeli public and not to the American public. And over this decade, we managed to transfer most of the Israeli companies to be registered in Israel. 80% of the companies until 2022 were registered in Israel. In this quarter, 80% of the companies are registered in Delaware. Can you explain what it means concerning revenues from taxes? When will we see it? Are these these new companies, it will take time before they exit or make profit. There are companies that are in different stages, and the sequence, if it is severed, will take a long time to rebound. But I'd like to return to a few things. 100 million shekels that was taken from the chief scientist and given to other sources, and that's a part of this budget. But I'd like to talk about the interest as well. You said that interest rate of zero or negative is not something natural. And we did live in a zero interest rate for a long time, and we got used to this. This actually, it did many things to our industry, and I believe that there's a whole generation that never knew what an interest rate is or inflation, and they all of a sudden are waking up, and our goal is not to go back to zero, but to 3-4%. People have to know what to do when the alternative of investment is not just the stock exchange, but rather the banks, and you have to try to be a better alternative when comparing the risks. So the entire high-tech industry has to understand the meaning of inflation, the meaning of interest rate, to translate it to what we do. It's not only the social aspect that changed. You talked about the quantitative aspect. This industry is measured by the number of new startups, the patents that are registered, exits, fundraising, etc. And we got sort of subjugated to these. And what else is there? I'll say something strange. As a person who coined that phrase, Startup Nation, I think that now it's insufficient to be a startup nation and not even a scale-up nation. Are we not? Should we be that? People approach me on that. It's not enough. It's not the point, being or not being a scale-up nation. If we look at the world and if we ask ourselves, who are going to be those stayed at the top of the table of innovation in the world? It is not necessarily going to be those countries that have the highest number of venture capitals and startup companies. I believe that it is those countries that implement the technologies for the well-being of their citizens and the state. In other words, if there's a statement that I truly like a lot of William Gibson that you probably know, that the future is already here. It's simply not equally distributed. So there are biometric passports, but there are 4 months queues to get one. So when these implementations are working in the benefit of citizens, and you haven't seen thus far people thinking how to improve the quality of life of the residents here, it's not only that. The most important thing is the change in the paradigm of healthcare, of education, of transportation, of whenever these things of the future that look differently to what we have now. It's a major leap forward. And the question is, what countries will have those things earlier? And we are the ideal place for that to happen. But it has to be our vision. It has to be something that we are eager to see. And if we do that, it is exactly what will increase our entire ecosystem. Erez, are entrepreneurs interested in turning Israel to a laboratory for various developments? Or perhaps we are just a small market and you can't really make a buck from what is happening here? Let's not forget that the Israeli high-tech industry is flourishing because of the knowledge transfer between the army and the civil society. And the military is a significant part of this country. In Israel, there's a deployment of amazing technologies. We do have a technological army. Thanks to this, we do live here. This is life itself. No other. Without those technological capabilities that went back and forth between the military and the civil society, wouldn't have existed today. So we have this tradition, a long tradition of cooperation between the public sector and the private sector in the creation of technologies. And we regretfully are rather limited to the army and less so for the civil society and transportation and education and infrastructure. And I think that this is totally in the cards. And I think that Israel is a laboratory indeed for various technological experiments that companies do at the beginning of their way. There is the potential to do that, and a smart governmental policy can encourage that. Why do you include the high-tech? Perhaps the high-tech world with that can demand that. That's Alice in Wonderland. It won't happen. The Israeli economic miracle, whenever an economist looks at it, he looks at the high-tech industry. And that's the source for the state of Israel. And you have to invest it back into the Israeli industry. You have to have a long-term plan of infrastructure, of education, of closing social gaps. It's not something to do overnight. It's a 10 or 20-year plan. I won't place Singapore on the table because it is a type of a dictatorship, but they do have economic plans. The fact that the high-tech is standing at the forefront of this coup cannot actually bring about an alienation from certain parts of society if I draw an economic plan. And I have an amazing source that has to be developed and helped. You don't need to fight against it, but they do now. And this is the role of the state and the Minister of Finance to close the gaps of infrastructure, education, and culture to create a future for all those who are not high-tech. And it doesn't take place, regretfully. When you talk about envy and hatred, of course we have it. We are in the digital revolution era in the world, just like the communist revolution, or rather the industrial revolution that brought about the communist parties. We are in an era of populism which is anti the digital industry. The high-tech has always been the chosen son of the Israeli economy. Perhaps it changes now. Look, I feel no hatred. I do feel a lot of appreciation. Mellanox was in Tel Chai and in Yokneam and Kiryat Gat and Beersheba and still in Beersheba and Jerusalem. I don't want to say used to be, but today it's simply called NVIDIA. There's a lot of appreciation, and we do take care of all sectors. Let's not just declare wars because of the media. There's no hatred. I think that there's a great deal of appreciation to the high-tech sector. I, as a CEO, made sure we take care of all sectors, and we tried to reach out to the Druze and bring education to them because of that colonel who died in Gaza, and the 10% for the Arabs and the Palestinians. I think the high-tech is doing great things on social levels, as well as the Haredi and everyone else. It's got nothing to do with a ballot box. What chances are there? Hang on a second. Let me just finish. I don't think that Judaism is a sect. I think that it's totally exaggerated to say that. I think that it's a religion thanks to which we are here. It kept us as Jews for 5,000 years, and I'm willing to get myself killed, and so are my kids, only because we are Jews. Let's lower the flames and look things in the eye and try to work together to resolve social problems that exist. It won't help us to go to polarization. There's no hatred toward the high-tech leadership. There is a lot of love and appreciation. We have to work with the Haredi and with the Arabs and build a common life. And that's what we're doing, and it is doable. And I was yesterday, and you connect between Jews and Muslims and Druze. We celebrated Christmas and Eid al-Fitr with kosher food. And you can do so many things if you only want to. So the fact that we have the media here and they want headlines, forget about it. Judaism is a religion that loves men and wants peace, and the Muslims are the same. We have to join hands to turn this place into the best place to live in, and not the other way around. We simply have to conclude soon. We have to work. If you want headlines, then we need to work together. I'm not saying that Judaism is a sect. I said that the leadership of the ultra-Orthodox are behaving like the leaders of a sect. I'm a Jew like anyone else. I never said that Judaism is a sect, but I have to place something on the table which which I disagree with Eyal. High-tech helps, but it cannot solve the problems. Half the country is not a part of high-tech, and they have pains, and they suffer, and its ability to have social mobility, unlike the high-tech people, is nearly zilch. And when you see every child who is 30-year-old gets 30,000 shekels a month, and you grow up in Kiryat Shmona and you don't stand a chance, you're angry. And this anger is directed toward high-tech. And the high-tech in the last few years, and I have to say that, had a lot of patronizing. When you saw parties with hamburgers falling from the sky, that did not contribute to the amazing social relationship in Israel. There are two separated, disconnected states here. You have to acknowledge this fact. One sentence, and we're bound to finish. High-tech today is the great equalizer. It's the tool with true social mobility, and a child in Kiryat Shmona can enter high-tech if he only studies like anyone else. And I think that high-tech today, when you look at the fabric, it has socially, religiously, geographically, is a real equalizer. The key word is education, Erez. It's not true for those who were born in the periphery. You ignore reality. How many people who came from the periphery have a BA in engineering? Come on, check this. The fact that there is mobility, every person has mobility. You're wrong. Everyone can go and study. Thank you so much to you all. We listened to you, and it was very thought-provoking. Good luck to high-tech.